Hello, my name is Cassandra, and I'm going to be talking about the importance of 9 Supreme Court justices. It's to inform my group of why it is so important to have a new Supreme Court justice appointed immediately, because there's only 8 right now. The significance of 9 Supreme Court justices is there's one for each of the 9 circuit courts of the United States. They're each appointed to one, and they don't move around or shift. They just sit at one for one term about every 2 years, so they don't just sit at the Supreme Court bench every time. They are the highest appointed judges in the United States. So, let's say that you have your state courts, and then if something is, racially charged or something, then you would bring it to a federal level, and then they could decide, and then those cases become sometimes huge and become laws and just impact, our federal court system because they trump all other courts. The United States Supreme Court was established and pursuant to the Article 3 of the United States Constitution in 1789. It is the only court established by the Constitution. All other courts are established by Congress. And the very first case that was actually heard by the Supreme Court once it was established was in 1791, so only a couple years later. And then the positions are not all on the same level. There's 8 associate judges, 7 currently, and then there's 1 Chief Justice, and he's still remaining. 6 of these judges constitute a quorum, so there always has to be at least 6 at any given time, because sometimes they get sick or they, are excused or whatever, so there has to be at least 6 always there. Each of the 9 sit at one, like I said before, each of the 9 sit at one 9th Circuit Court. The surviving justices right now is the Chief Justice John Roberts, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Clarence Thomas, Sonia Sotomayor, Anthony Kennedy, which is actually Washington State's circuit judge, which is Washington State's in the 9th Circuit, and he would be our Supreme Court justice that comes and sits in our circuit. Samuel Alito, Elena Kagan, and Stephen Breyer. I plan to share why the Supreme Court exists and why it is important to have an odd number of justices. The Supreme Court decides on cases that make history, and an offset amount of votes is very important to make historical decisions, because if you have a constant 4-4 or 2-2 vote, you'll never get anywhere. So to have that extra person really makes a big difference. Like in Roe versus Wade, the decision was 7-2, and that was decided that the right to privacy under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment extended to a woman's decision to have an abortion. And that was a huge case, still is today. Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka was decided that separate schools for whites and African Americans was found unconstitutional. And that was during, actually found out about that during the movie Selma, is when they went to case for that. And there was tons of plaintiffs on that case. The most recent one, Obergefell versus Hodges, was actually decided 5-4 about the same-sex couple's right to marry all across the United States, not just state-specific. And that was found under the due process. It was violating, them not being able to marry was violating the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Miranda is also known as your Miranda rights that the police read you when you get arrested. Miranda versus Arizona defined the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment as well, and shaped our rights that are read to us, like I said, by police now. And these are just a few of the cases that have made United States Supreme Court history and that have shaped America as we know it. Major cases. There's been so many cases that I've read, but those are just the main ones that I felt were worthy of talking about. So what happens when a court only has 8 justices, like right now? Well, as Sonia Sotomayor put it, which is an associate justice, she said it is more difficult for us to do our job if we are not intended to be a court of 9. Because, like I said earlier, the 4-4 or the 2-2, it just doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to have an odd number of justices because, you get that offset that will either say yay or nay to something. The court has found itself in a tough spot for splitting 4-4 on highly contentious cases. So things that, really need to get pushed through and really need to have a decision, they're not being decided on because there's not that ninth justice. And the justices are declining to schedule important cases that they had previously agreed to hear because they don't have that ninth person, and so it's just making it really difficult to just, the court system is lagging and is slowing way down and even stopped because they're not, pushing forward with their work. They can't, it's 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and so without that ninth person, it's not going anywhere. And then Chief Justice John Roberts said, where the absence of one justice cannot be made up by another, needless recusal deprives litigants, so the people who are trying to have their cases heard, of the 9 justices to which they are entitled. And because it's constitutional that, everybody, the litigants that come up with their cases have the 9 justices is, vital. And then if you don't have it, then you're not really getting a fair trial or a fair case. Justice Scalia declined, actually, when he was alive, he declined to take himself out of a case, even with being accused of having a conflict of interest, in which I really liked, because as a judge, you have to be neutral on a lot of things. Even though you may swing to the right or the left, you have to really think about, okay, how is this going to affect society? Is this good for public policy? Is this good for, just me, or am I thinking of other people? And Chief Justice William Rehnquist said, which was a previous Chief Justice, said that affirmance of conflicting lower courts' decisions by an equally divided court would lay down one rule in Athens and another in Rome with a vengeance. So if you have all these cases that are conflicting in lower courts and then they look to the higher court, those 9 people to agree or disagree or find where they erred, if they don't have that, then how are they going to ever figure out? It's just going to slow everything way down. And if the court proceeds with 8 justices, it raises a possibility that by reason of a tie vote, it would find itself unable to resolve the significant legal issue presented by the case. So, things that just aren't getting resolved, obviously, if it's a tie. So we really need to have a 9th justice in there now. So to summarize, a court of 9 is the best in making decisions on important cases because to have an even split does not let the court go anywhere, and it holds up major cases, like I said earlier. Although there have been times where there were 6 or 10 justices, those got reversed, those got appealed because they just weren't. They kind of worked, but it wasn't as good as the 9 justices. But society today has many controversies that can't be decided on evenly. Right now, we're such a split country that, the Roe versus Wade is going to stay, Brown versus Board of Education is obviously going to stay, but Obergefell versus Hodges is going to stay. But it's just cases that could come up that are equal to that you can't be split on. You have to have that, extra, okay, is this the deciding vote or not? So to continue, who appoints the new justices? Are they elected? Are they appointed? Blah, blah, blah. What are the steps to appointing a new one? So, according to Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, the President shall nominate and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court. So right now, the President, he appointed, so he had a nominee for a Supreme Court justice, but because I feel like he's more on the liberal side, and maybe it's because the president picked him is why Senate is not agreeing to it. But, there is a way for him to get around and appoint that new justice, but I feel like it just wouldn't be in the best interest. I feel like, there should be 2 agreeing parties. So the Senate and the president should both agree on this person. By law, the current president can choose whoever they want, but again, Senate has to agree completely with, they have to investigate the person. What are the qualifications? Are they fit to do the job? That kind of thing. The Senate Judiciary Committee conducts an investigation on the nominee, and then the full Senate decides whether or not to vote on the nominee. But right now they're refusing to do an investigation